Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched in the comments. The wind had quieted, but the desert still breathed heat. Fine red dust drifted through the air like ash from a long-dead fire, coating everything. The wrecked wagon, the dying horse, and the man who stood in the middle of it all, silent, tired, and thinking. Elias Ward had been driving west for 3 days when a sandstorm hit. He wasn't traveling for gold or glory. Those years had burned out of him long ago. He was hauling supplies to a ranch near the Santa Cruz Basin. A small contract, but enough to keep him fed and moving, which was all he ever asked from life anymore. He had been a ranch hand once before the raid, before the fire and the graves. Now he worked odd jobs between towns, staying out of arguments, drinking little, and sleeping where no one asked his name. That morning, before the storm swallowed the sky, he thought the trip would be an easy 2-day haul. The desert proved otherwise. The wagon lay on its side, one wheel split clean through, the other half buried in sand. His horse was gone, bolted during the storm, and the spare mule had collapsed under the strain. Elias's shirt was soaked through with sweat. His hands were raw from gripping the reins until the wind tore them away. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the wreck, measuring what he'd lost and what he could still save. Then he saw her. 100 feet away, near what had once been a shallow creek, a body lay face down beside a dead horse. The sight made his stomach tighten. He hesitated, scanning the horizon first. Out here, an injured person could mean trouble, bait for something worse. But the land was empty. Nothing moved but the shimmering air. He took his rifle from the wagon, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward her, slow and deliberate. When he reached her, he crouched beside the body. She was young, maybe mid-20s, her skin darkened by sun and dust, her long black hair tangled and half-caked with sand. Her dress, made of soft deerskin, was torn along one side, and her turquoise necklace hung broken against her throat. An Apache woman, by the look of her. He touched her wrist, weak pulse still alive. Elias exhaled, relief mixed with worry. He had seen men kill women like her for less than being in the wrong place. If soldiers found her, they wouldn't ask questions. He didn't know what had brought her here, a raid, an escape, maybe both, but none of that mattered right now. She was still breathing, and leaving her wasn't something he could live with. He lifted her onto the shoulders. She was lighter than he expected, bones and exhaustion. He carried her back to the remains of the wagon, laid her in the narrow shade cast by a broken axle, and uncorked his canteen. He let a few drops touch her lips, careful not to spill more than he had to. Her eyes fluttered open, sharp and suspicious, the kind of look that came from surviving too much. "Easy," he said quietly. His voice was rough from dust and silence. "You're safe. Just drink." She stared at him for a long moment before taking a small sip. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Then she turned her face away, too weak to argue, but too proud to look grateful. Elias sat back on his heels, watching her breathing steady. He felt a familiar tension in his chest, that old sense of responsibility he tried to ignore. He had promised himself years ago not to get involved with anyone again. People brought risk, but leaving her out here alone would have been worse than any risk. He took stock of the wreckage. One half-broken barrel of water, some jerky, his revolver, and what was left of his tools. No way to rebuild the wagon. The axles were shot. He could patch together a lean-to, maybe ride out the heat until sunset. She stirred again, mumbling something in Apache, the words low and strained. He didn't understand, but he recognized the tone. Confusion, pain, fear. She tried to sit up. He stopped her with a firm hand on her shoulder. "Don't move yet. You took a bad fall." Her gaze met his. There was fear there, but also calculation, a quiet measuring of who he was and what he might do. He respected that. In her place, he would have done the same. "I'm Elias Ward," he said after a pause. "I'm not with the army. I'm just trying to make it out of here." She said nothing, but her shoulders eased slightly. He nodded once, as if they'd made an agreement, then turned to gather planks from the wagon's remains. He needed shade before the sun killed them both. He hammered stakes into the sand with the heel of his boot, stretched the canvas from the torn wagon cover, and built a shelter low to the ground, just enough for 2 people to sit under without roasting. When he finally crawled inside, sweat burning his eyes, she was asleep again, breathing slow, her face pale under the dirt. He poured the last bit of water into a tin cup, left it within her reach, and sat with his back to the wagon wheel, staring at the vast emptiness beyond the dunes. He thought of the ranch he was supposed to reach, the pay he wouldn't collect, the quiet life he'd been trying to build away from blood and fire. Somehow, in this wasteland, he had found someone who needed him again. As the sky turned copper and the heat began to fall, he made a decision he didn't say out loud. He would wait until she could walk, then they'd move together. He didn't know her story or what kind of trouble might follow her, but something in her face, the exhaustion, the fight still burning behind it, made him think she'd earned a chance to survive. For now, that was enough. The morning came without warning. No sound, no cool air, just the light turning from red to white over the sand. Elias woke before sunrise, his neck stiff, his throat dry enough to ache. The shelter had held through the night, though the wind had loosened one corner of the canvas. He adjusted it quietly, careful not to wake the woman. She was still asleep, her breathing steady, her arm resting across her chest where the torn dress showed bruised skin. He studied her for a moment, not with curiosity, but with the practical eye of a man who needed to know what he was dealing with. She looked younger than he first thought, maybe 20, 21. There was strength in her shoulders despite the exhaustion, and her hands, though small, carried the calluses of someone used to working the land. She wasn't helpless, just broken down by the storm and by whatever came before it. He walked a short distance from the shelter to check the wagon. The sight didn't improve with daylight. One wheel was shattered beyond repair. The other barely held its shape. The mule was still dead, half covered in sand. Elias crouched beside it, stripped off the saddle straps, cut away what leather he could still use, and tied them into a coil. His hands moved automatically, one part survival, one part habit. He wasn't thinking about her at first, just about staying alive long enough to reach the next water source. But as the heat climbed and the silence thickened, he found himself glancing toward the shade where she slept. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she even wanted his help. But after what he'd seen in this land, patrols rounding up natives like strays, bounty riders who didn't care who they killed, he knew what would happen if she tried to cross this desert alone. By the time the sun was high, she stirred. Elias turned back and crouched beside her as she tried to push herself upright, one hand clutching her shoulder. "Slow," he said. "You're hurt." Her gaze locked on him. The suspicion was still there, but something softer came through this time. Confusion, maybe even gratitude she didn't want to show. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse and uncertain. "Storm," he said. "Hit hard. You were near the creek. Your horse didn't make it." She looked past him at the wreckage, her lips tightening as she processed what he said. "You're not with them?" she muttered. "Who?" "Soldiers." He shook his head. "No, I'm a hauler. Was taking supplies to a ranch out west. Guess the plan's gone now." Her shoulders eased a little. "You helped me." He nodded once. "Couldn't leave you out there." She sat silent for a while, drinking from the canteen he handed her in slow, measured sips. Then, finally, she said, "Ayoka." He caught the name, repeated it under his breath. "Ayoka." She looked at him directly then, the first time since waking, and said, "You have a name too?" Elias Ward. Something in his tone must have told her more than he intended. People said his name that way sometimes, the kind that carried a quiet warning behind it. They didn't speak much after that. Elias rationed what was left of the jerky and the water. She helped him sift through the wreckage for supplies, her movements slow but deliberate. He watched the way she examined each item with purpose. The fragments of rope, the small knife, a cracked mirror from the wagon's chest. Nothing wasted, nothing taken lightly. By midday, the heat turned vicious. Elias fixed what shade he could, then pointed toward the western ridge. "There's a spring that way," he said. 2 days if we move steady." "You sure?" "I've been through here before. Years ago." He didn't mention that the last time he'd come this route was during a chase, a group of settlers trying to escape raiders. Most hadn't made it. Ayoka frowned, scanning the horizon as if trying to remember the land. "If you go west," she said, "there are soldiers near the basin. Patrols. They take anyone they find. Apache or not." He nodded, considering that. "Then we cut south and circle around. You'd risk that for me?" Her tone wasn't soft. It was sharp, like she was testing him. Elias didn't answer right away. He tightened a strap on his satchel, checked the revolver at his hip, then looked up at her. "Doesn't matter who for. No one lasts out here alone." That was the closest thing to comfort he could offer. The rest of the afternoon was spent preparing for travel. He built a drag from 2 wagon planks and a length of rope, something to carry supplies without breaking their backs. Ayoka tore her damaged dress into strips, using the fabric to bind her shoulder tighter. He offered to help, but she refused with a small shake of her head. Pride, he thought. He respected that too. When the sun finally sank behind the rocks, they sat by the small fire he had managed to coax from splintered wood. The flames cracked low and steady, giving off just enough light to show the dirt on their faces. Elias handed her half a strip of jerky. "Eat slow," he said. She did, chewing in silence. Then, as the night settled in, she spoke again. "Why are you out here alone?" Elias warned. He stared at the fire for a while before answering. "Because I do better that way." She studied him, as if the answer didn't sit right. "No one does better alone." He didn't respond, but the line stayed in his head long after she lay down to sleep. When the stars came out, bright and countless, Elias sat awake with his rifle across his knees. His mind kept running the same loops: the broken wagon, the empty horizon, the woman beside him who shouldn't be alive. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but something about her steadiness, the way she had faced pain without fear, made him think they might stand chance. And for the first time in years, he didn't mind the thought of not being alone. By dawn, the desert had turned from black to silver. The stars were gone, the wind had calmed, and a thin gray light crept across the ridge. Elias packed their things in silence. What little there was to pack. 2 canteens, half a pouch of jerky, a torn blanket, and a few tools wrapped in canvas. He tied everything to the drag he'd built the day before and checked the straps twice, the way a man does when he knows mistakes out here can't be fixed later. Ayoka woke with a low groan, rubbing her shoulder. The makeshift bandage had held through the night, but he could see how much pain she was in. Still, she didn't complain. She pulled herself up, adjusted the strap of her satchel, and waited for him to finish. Elias glanced at her, the firelight still catching her face. She looked stronger that morning, still tired, still cautious, but sharper, more aware. "We'll move while it's cool," he said. "Once the sun's up, the sand will burn your boots clean through." She nodded. "You said there's water west?" "Southwest, if the spring's still running." Her brow furrowed. "You're not sure?" "I'm never sure of anything out here," he answered, tightening the last knot. That honesty seemed to surprise her, but also seemed to earn her trust, at least a little. They started walking at first light. The desert stretched in every direction, an endless sprawl of rock, sagebrush, and silence. The sun hadn't yet turned cruel, but Elias could feel the heat rising under his shirt. Each step sank into soft sand that dragged at their feet. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. They walked side by side but apart, the kind of distance that says, "I'm here, but don't ask why." By mid-morning, Ayoka's shoulder began to tremble from strain. Elias noticed before she said anything. He stopped, set the drag down, and walked over to her. "Let me see," he said. She hesitated, then sighed and pulled the sling aside. Her shoulder was swollen and bruised dark purple around the joint. He pressed lightly along the bone, careful not to hurt her more than he had to. "It's not broken," he said. "You'll need to rest it every hour." Ayoka exhaled slowly. "I can still walk." "I know you can," Elias said, "but if you push it too far, it won't heal right." She gave him a faint glare, something between irritation and pride. "You talk like a doctor. I've been hurt enough times to learn what works." She smiled, small but genuine. It was the first one he'd seen from her, and it startled him more than he cared to admit. They rested in the shadow of a low ridge for a while. Elias shared what was left of a biscuit from his pack. She tore it in half and gave him back the bigger piece without a word. He didn't argue. Out here, Small gestures spoke louder than talk. When they started moving again, the wind shifted. It carried a smell that didn't belong to sand or sage, a faint, sour scent of smoke. Elias stopped, raised a hand. Ayoka froze behind him. "Riders?" she asked quietly. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing against the glare. "Maybe," he said. "Could be an old camp. Could be patrols burning something." Her voice hardened. "Patrols don't burn something. They burn people." He didn't answer, but she wasn't wrong. They detoured south, sticking close to a dry creek bed. The ground there was firmer, marked by old wagon tracks half buried in dust. It made Elias uneasy, proof others had passed through recently. After a while, Ayoka asked, "You said you were taking supplies to a ranch. Who sent you?" Elias hesitated. No one had asked him that in a long time. "A man named Jacob Murrin. Owns a place near Santa Cruz. Needed nails, tools, flour. Simple haul. Pays cash." She studied him. "And you do that alone?" "Always. You don't trust people." He gave a dry half-smile. "People gave me reason not to." Ayoka looked away, but he saw understanding in her expression. "Same reason you're out here?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. "Lost my family 5 years ago. Raid on our ranch near San Pedro. Came back from town and found nothing left but ashes." She lowered her eyes, her jaw tightening. "Soldiers?" "No. Men who wanted the land." He paused. "They didn't care who they killed to get it." She didn't speak for a while after that. When she did, her voice was softer. "My village was burned too. Not by soldiers, by settlers who said we were hiding horses that weren't ours. My father was shot trying to stop them." Elias looked at her. The same story, told in a different language. "That's why I was alone," she continued. "I was going south to find what's left of my aunt's people near the mountains. Maybe they're alive. Maybe not." He nodded slowly, understanding now what had driven her through the desert. Two lives broken by the same kind of fire. By late afternoon, the temperature dropped just enough to move faster. The ridge ahead sloped downward into a basin, dotted with low mesquite and dry brush. Elias knelt, brushed his fingers through the sand, and felt it, faint, cool moisture beneath the surface. "There's water close," he said. "Not much, but enough." Ayoka dropped to her knees beside him. "You're sure?" He pointed to a patch of darker sand where small green shoots had survived. "Plants don't lie." Together they dug until a thin trickle appeared, barely a handful of water, but cold and clean. They cupped it between their palms, took turns drinking. It wasn't enough to fill their canteens, but it meant the spring couldn't be far. When the last light faded, Elias built a small fire behind a rock wall to hide the flame. Ayoka sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the glow. For the first time since the storm, she looked calmer, as if the worst part had passed. "You said no one lasts alone," she said suddenly. "Maybe you were right." Elias looked at her through the smoke. "I wasn't trying to be." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should try more often." He didn't know how to answer that, so he didn't. But as the night settled deep and the desert quieted around them, Elias realized something had shifted, not just between them, but inside himself. For years, he had lived without purpose beyond surviving the day. Now, for the first time, he had someone depending on him again. And that small, undeniable fact changed everything. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge when Elias stirred from shallow sleep. The fire had burned down to embers, a faint orange glow buried in gray ash. Ayoka was still asleep on the other side, wrapped in the torn blanket, her injured arm held close to her chest. The night chill lingered, sharp and dry, and Elias moved carefully so as not to wake her. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders, and scanned the land. The basin ahead was quiet, flat, and empty, except for a faint trail of dust where something had moved in the night. Maybe a coyote, maybe riders. He didn't like not knowing which. Out here, the difference could mean life or death. He crouched to stir the embers back to life, feeding them with thin branches of mesquite. When Ayoka woke, she sat up slowly, blinking against the rising light. Her hair had come loose from its braid, her face still lined with fatigue, but there was a steadiness in her eyes now. She had survived worse. Elias handed her the canteen. "Drink before the heat hits." She did carefully, then handed it back. How far to the spring? If we keep pace, half a day, he said. The ground slopes down from here. We'll follow the dry bed until it opens. She nodded, then looked at him curiously. You always this quiet? He shrugged slightly. Talking never fixed much for me. Ayoka smirked faintly. Maybe not, but silence can be dangerous too. Makes people guess what you're thinking. I don't have much worth guessing about. Her smile faded, replaced by a trace of seriousness. You do. You just don't show it. He didn't respond. Instead, he checked the revolver at his hip, the one piece of equipment still in working order. The barrel was clean, oiled from habit. The weight of it reminded him of everything he'd lost and everything he might have to do again if the desert turned against them. They broke camp within minutes. Elias took the lead, dragging their supplies across the sand while Ayoka followed, her steps lighter now that her shoulder was wrapped tight. The day grew hotter with each mile, the kind of heat that pressed down on the back of the neck until it ached. They walked in silence, saving breath, watching the land shift from pale yellow to the deep red of baked rock. By noon, the air shimmered so thickly it blurred the horizon. Then Elias saw it, a faint dark line ahead where the ground dipped and the color of the earth changed. That's it, he said. When they reached it, a thin stream wound between two low banks, fed by a seep under the stone. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ayoka dropped to her knees, cupping the water in her hands, splashing her face before drinking. Elias filled the canteens, letting the water run cool over his wrists. Relief hit him harder than expected. Not joy, exactly, but something quieter, steadier. Survival bought another day. After they'd drunk their fill, he found a patch of shade under a fallen boulder and gestured for her to sit. We'll stay till evening. No point moving in this heat. Ayoka leaned back, resting her head against the stone. You've done this before, she said. He looked at her. What makes you think that? You move like a man who knows how far he can push before he breaks. Elias hesitated. I worked cattle most of my life. The land teaches you when to move and when to stay put. Cattle, she repeated softly, almost amused. You don't look like a man who just watched cows. That's all I used to be, he said, though the words felt wrong even as he said them. After my family was gone, I stopped being anything else. Ayoka turned her face toward him. You lost him in that raid, didn't you? He nodded slowly. There was no point denying it. My wife and boy. We had a small place north of San Pedro. I was in town buying supplies. Came back to smoke and bones. She said nothing for a long while. The only sound was the faint trickle of water nearby. Then she asked, Did you ever find who did it? No, he said. Didn't see the point. The sheriff said they were drifters, maybe outlaws. They could have been anyone. Even if I found them, it wouldn't bring anything back. Her expression softened. I understand that. He looked up at her. Your father? She nodded. And my brother. I was away gathering wood. Came back too late. I thought if I kept moving, I could find someone left, an aunt, maybe cousins, but I don't even know if they're alive. For a moment, the silence between them wasn't heavy or awkward. It was shared. Two people sitting beside a trickle of water in a land that had taken nearly everything from both of them. As the sun dropped lower, Elias rose and began setting up a small camp for the night. He used a flat stone for a stove, stacked branches for fire, and checked the drag for damage. Ayoka joined him without asking, gathering dry brush and smoothing the sand for sleeping. She worked with quiet precision, no wasted movement, no complaint. Later, as the fire burned low, Ayoka asked a question that had probably been building since the moment they met. Elias, why did you help me? You could have left. I was nothing to you. He stared into the fire, watching the flame flicker through the cracks in the wood. Didn't think about it much. You were breathing. That was reason enough. That's simple. He looked up at her. Out here it is. She studied him, then nodded, as if that answer finally made sense. They ate what was left of the jerky, washed it down with water, and let the night settle around them. The air cooled fast, and the stars came out bright and sharp. Ayoka sat with her knees pulled close, staring into the dark. You ever think about leaving this land? She asked suddenly. Elias took a long breath before answering. I did once. Thought I could start over somewhere else. But no matter how far you go, the same kind of men find you. Ayoka's voice was quiet. Then maybe we don't leave. Maybe we build something that keeps them away. He looked at her, half smiling. You sound like you've already planned it. Maybe I have. The fire cracked softly between them, and for the first time since the storm, Elias felt something settle inside him. Not hope, not yet, but direction. For years, he had been moving with no reason beyond staying alive. Now, in the quiet of that desert night, sitting beside a woman who had lost as much as he had, he felt the faint pull of something worth protecting again. When Ayoka leaned her head back against the stone and drifted into sleep, Elias stayed awake a while longer, watching the horizon, rifle across his knees. The land was silent except for the whisper of wind and the faint pulse of water under the rocks. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in facing it. The morning broke with the faint sound of wind brushing through the mesquite branches. Elias was already awake, sitting near the fire's dying embers with a cup of blackened coffee he'd brewed from old grounds saved in a tin. It tasted bitter and faintly metallic, but the warmth helped chase off the chill that clung to the desert at dawn. Ayoka stirred not long after, pushing the blanket aside and wincing as she shifted her injured shoulder. Don't move too fast, he said without looking up. You slept better than before. She stretched her good arm, then gave a small nod. I didn't dream this time. Elias knew what that meant without needing to ask. Dreams weren't rest out here. They were memories clawing their way back. He had plenty of his own. They ate in silence, sharing the last of the dried meat and half a biscuit she'd managed to save. When they finished, Elias checked the canteens again. They were nearly empty. He frowned. We'll have to refill before noon, he said. The spring runs thin. It won't last long. Ayoka studied him. You worry too much. That's why I'm still breathing, he replied, packing their few supplies. She smirked faintly. And lonely, maybe. He didn't answer, but her words lingered. By mid-morning, they were moving again, west now, toward higher ground. The heat had already begun to settle in, waves of it shimmering off the stone like invisible fire. Elias walked ahead, pulling the drag behind him. Ayoka followed, her steps steady but slower, her face set in quiet determination. They had traveled nearly an hour when Elias stopped suddenly. He raised a hand. Hold up, he said in a low voice. Ayoka froze, her eyes scanning the distance. What is it? Tracks, he murmured, crouching near the sand. He brushed the surface with his fingers, tracing the shallow depressions left behind. Horses, 4, maybe 5, passed through not long ago. Soldiers? He shook his head. Could be, but the spacing's wrong. Too tight for a patrol. Could be travelers or drifters. Ayoka's expression hardened. The kind who take what they want. Elias stood, gripping the rifle strap on his shoulder. We'll keep low. If they're ahead of us, we'll cut south and stay in the gullies. Don't want to draw eyes. They moved cautiously, keeping close to the rocks. The land shifted as they walked. More brush, more signs of life, even a few distant vultures circling over the basin. It meant they were getting closer to water, but it also meant people weren't far. Around midday, they found an old trail wagon half buried in sand. Its canvas top had rotted through, and the wheels had long since splintered, but scattered near it were the remains of a small camp. A rusted coffee pot, a torn boot, and a fire ring long cold. Elias scanned the area, tense. Looks abandoned, Ayoka said quietly. Maybe, he replied, or maybe someone left fast. She knelt beside one of the wagon's beams, fingers brushing a set of footprints hardened in the dirt. These are smaller. A woman's. Elias nodded grimly. And more than one set. 2 men, 1 woman. Maybe 3 days old. He looked east, then west, the direction the tracks led. His gut tightened. What are you thinking? She asked. That we're walking into someone's trail, and I don't like it. They pushed forward anyway, cutting south to stay clear of the tracks. The air thickened with heat, and Ayoka began to limp slightly, her shoulders stiffening again. Elias slowed his pace without comment. He didn't want to admit it, but he was growing used to her presence. The sound of her footsteps just behind him, the quiet way she read the land. When they finally stopped to rest near a ridge, Elias dropped the drag, knelt beside a patch of rock, and drew a small map in the dust with his knife. "We're here," he said, marking an X. "If we keep moving south another day, we'll hit the old cattle trail. There's a chance of finding help there." Ayoka leaned closer. "You know this country well. Used to ride it years ago," he said. "Before the raids." Before he trailed off. She watched him quietly. "You lost more than family, didn't you?" Elias didn't meet her eyes. "Yeah, I lost the kind of man I used to be." The air hung heavy between them. Ayoka reached out, her hand hesitating before resting lightly on his arm. "Maybe you didn't lose him," she said softly. "Maybe he's just waiting." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, the silence between them wasn't empty. It carried something fragile and real like understanding. The sound of distant hooves shattered it. Elias's head snapped toward the ridge. "Get down," he hissed. They crouched behind the rocks as a small group of riders appeared in the distance. 4 men, dust trailing behind them. The sunlight flashed off rifles slung over their saddles. They weren't cavalry. These men moved with the restless, twitchy ease of outlaws. Ayoka's hand tightened on his sleeve. "If they see us." "They won't," Elias said quickly. "Stay low. Don't move." The riders passed along the ridge, talking loud, laughing, the kind of laughter that made his skin crawl. One of them pointed toward the wagon ruins in the distance. Elias felt his jaw tighten. "They'll scavenge it," he whispered. "Then move on. We'll wait till they're gone." Minutes dragged into half an hour. Finally, the riders turned west, fading into the glare of the sun. Elias waited longer still before standing. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and his pulse pounded in his throat. Ayoka rose beside him. "They're gone," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "For now," he replied. "We'll move at night from here on. Too easy to spot during the day." They walked again as the sun began to sink, the sky turning copper and red. The land cooled, shadows stretching long across the desert floor. Elias carried the rifle ready now, every step cautious. As they reached a narrow gorge, Ayoka spoke quietly, almost as if to herself. "You could have left me when the riders came. They would have never known I was here." Elias kept walking, his voice low but steady. "Would have known myself, though." She looked at him, a long, searching look that held both gratitude and confusion. "You don't even know me." He stopped, met her eyes. "Maybe not yet, but I know what it's like to lose everything. I'm not watching it happen again." They stood there a long moment before she nodded, saying nothing more. The wind rose behind them, carrying the smell of rain, faint but real. That night, they built no fire. They rested in the shadow of a cliff, the stars bright overhead. Elias sat guard as always, but when Ayoka drifted close beside him, leaning her head lightly against his shoulder, he didn't move away. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like something beginning, small, uncertain, but alive. And though Elias didn't say it out loud, he knew deep down that he would die before letting this woman vanish into the same emptiness that had taken everyone else from him. The desert rain came lightly at dawn, rare, hesitant, and almost silent. It soaked the sand just enough to darken the earth, not enough to cool it. Elias stood on the edge of the ridge, watching the horizon through a haze of mist that would vanish before midday. The air smelled different now, clean but sharp, like dust washed from old wounds. Behind him, Ayoka still slept, her head resting against the folded blanket, her breathing steady. He had kept watch through the night, listening for hoofbeats that never came. The outlaws had vanished westward, but he knew better than to assume they were gone for good. Out here, trouble rarely left. It only circled back when least expected. As the first rays of sunlight cut across the basin, Elias turned and knelt beside her, shaking her shoulder gently. "Time to move," he said. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the light. "Already, if we stay too long, we'll cook where we lie," he said with a dry half-smile. She sighed, pushing herself up carefully. "You're worse than my father," she muttered, but there was warmth in her tone. Elias packed their things while she adjusted the sling on her shoulder. Her arm was healing, but he could still see the pain in the way she moved. He didn't mention it. She wouldn't appreciate the pity. They started walking west again, the air thick with humidity that would soon burn off. The land began to change. Fewer dunes, more scattered brush, the faint signs of dry riverbeds that hadn't seen water in months. The ground beneath their boots was firmer now, and Elias recognized it. "There's an old trail about a mile ahead," he said. "Used to be a stage route before the war. Might lead us toward Fort Merritt." Ayoka glanced at him sharply. "Fort Merritt? That's a soldier outpost." "I know," he said, "but it's also where the nearest well is. We can't keep guessing at puddles forever." She frowned. "If they see me—" "They won't," he interrupted. "Not if we stay careful." Ayoka didn't argue further, but he could see her tension rising. Every mention of soldiers brought something hard into her eyes. Not just fear, but memory. Elias didn't press. Everyone had ghosts they didn't owe to strangers. And though they weren't strangers anymore, he respected the space between what was said and what wasn't. By late morning, the sun was burning high again. The trail appeared as a thin cut of dirt winding through scrub and stone. Wagon ruts still scarred the ground, and there were the remains of old posts where telegraph lines had once stood. Elias paused beside one, the wood cracked and leaning. He touched it absently, thinking of a time when messages traveled faster than people, when the world had felt smaller and maybe a little safer. He turned to Yoka. "We'll follow it north for a while, then cut west. There's a dry gulch ahead we can camp in." She nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You remember everything about this land." "Not everything," he said. "Just enough to get by." She gave him a faint smile. "That's more than most." The hours dragged, the heat shimmering around them like glass. When they finally reached the gulch, Elias dropped the drag and crouched to check the sand. It was damp, faintly, but enough to mean water wasn't far below. He dug with his hands until the first drops began to pool. They filled a small tin cup, enough for 2 swallows each. It wasn't much, but it was clean. Ayoka knelt beside him, her eyes lifting to the sky. "You ever think this land punishes everyone who stays too long?" Elias looked up, following her gaze. "Maybe. Or maybe it just doesn't care." She studied him, thoughtful. "You talk like a man who stopped believing in anything." He hesitated before answering. "Belief got burned out of me a long time ago. The things I cared about didn't survive the fire." Ayoka didn't look away. "And yet, here you are, helping someone you barely knew. You still believe in something." He stared at her for a long moment, the sun catching the edge of her face. "Maybe I'm just too damn stubborn to stop trying." Her lips curved into a quiet smile. Stubborn's not the worst thing to be. They rested there for most of the afternoon, hiding from the heat beneath the rock ledge. Elias took time to clean his rifle, using what oil he had left. Ayoka gathered small branches, building a slow, smokeless fire to dry their clothes. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't the strained quiet of strangers anymore. It was the steady calm of 2 people who had begun to understand each other without needing to speak. But that calm didn't last. Near dusk, just as the light began to fade, Elias heard it, faint at first, then clearer. Hoofbeats. 2 horses moving slow but steady. He motioned for Ayoka to get down. She slid behind the rocks without a sound. Elias crouched low, peering over the ridge. 2 men rode along the trail. One older, his face half covered by a scarf, the other thin and nervous, a rifle slung loose across his saddle. Not soldiers. Not outlaws either, at least not the organized kind. Drifters, maybe bounty men. They stopped not 50 yards from where Elias hid, talking in low voices. He could make out bits and pieces, Apache camp, reward posters, woman seen near the basin. His stomach tightened. Ayoka's eyes widened as she caught the words too. Her breath came shallow. Elias placed a hand gently on her arm, a silent warning to stay still. When the riders moved on, heading north, he exhaled slowly. "They're hunting," he said under his breath. "Not for me. For you." Ayoka looked down, her jaw tight. "There's a bounty," she whispered. "They think I was part of the raid near San Carlos." "I wasn't, but they don't care." Elias stared at her. How much? $50, dead or alive. He swore under his breath, a low, sharp sound that broke the stillness. That's enough to make any man greedy in this desert. Ayoka looked away. If you want to walk away, do it now. You'll be safer without me. He turned sharply toward her. You really think I'd leave you for $50? Her eyes met his, searching. I think you've seen enough death to know it follows me. So let it, he said. It's followed me too. The fire between them flickered low, throwing thin light across the rock. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ayoka said quietly, You're going to get yourself killed for me. Elias shook his head. No, I'm going to make sure you live. That's different. That night, it didn't sleep much. The rain had stopped, the ground steaming faintly under the moonlight. Elias sat awake with his rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He could feel the storm of men and violence closing in again, the kind of danger he'd spent years trying to outrun. But this time, he didn't feel the usual emptiness. He felt purpose, hard, simple, and clear. If the world wanted to take her, it would have to come through him first. And for the first time since the fire that had taken his home, Elias Ward finally knew what he was meant to do. The night passed with the slow pulse of danger pressing close, though nothing moved beyond the wind. Elias sat awake through most of it, listening every gust, every shifting pebble, every small sound that might mean someone was near. The rifle stayed across his lap, finger resting loosely on the trigger guard. Ayoka had fallen asleep only near dawn, exhaustion finally pulling her under despite her fear. When the sky began to lighten, Elias stood and stretched, his muscles aching from stillness. The desert looked deceptively calm again, a wide, painted plain of orange and gold under the first light. But his gut told him the riders they'd seen yesterday weren't far. Men who hunted for bounty didn't give up after one try. They circled back. He woke Ayoka gently. We move before the sun hits full, he said. Her eyes opened immediately, alert. You think they'll come back? I know they will, he said, tightening the strap on his pack. We stay near the gulch, use the rock for cover. They'll expect us to take the open trail west. She sat up, pulling the sling tight around her shoulder. Then what? We can't keep running forever. Elias looked out toward the horizon. We won't. There's a small ranching station south of here. I worked there years ago. Old man named Calder still runs it. He owes me a favor. If we can reach it by nightfall, we'll have walls, food, and maybe horses. Ayoka studied him, trying to read his face. You trust him? Elias gave a small, humorless smile. I don't trust anyone. But Calder's the kind who remembers debts. They broke camp quickly, leaving no trace, just the faint ashes of a dead fire buried under sand. As they walked, the land shifted from open plain to rolling stone ridges cut by dry washes. Each step was measured, their silence broken only by the crunch of boots and the occasional rustle of brush. Elias scanned every ridge, every rise. He had lived through ambushes before. You learned to feel danger before you saw it. By midday, they reached the base of a long canyon, narrow, steep, and shaded from the worst of the sun. It was the safest route south, but also the slowest. Ayoka leaned on her knees, catching her breath. We're close. Another 10 miles, he said. We make it before dark if we don't stop again. Before she could reply, a rifle shot cracked through the air. The sound echoed across the canyon walls, sharp and close. Sand exploded at Elias's feet. Down, he barked, pulling her behind a rock outcrop. Another shot whistled past, clanging against stone. They found us, she whispered, eyes wide. Stay low, he said, peering over the ridge. 2 riders were cresting the slope on the far side, the same ones from before, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. One man was shouting something Elias couldn't make out over the wind. He lined up his rifle, exhaled slowly, and fired once. The echo thundered through the canyon. One of the horses reared violently, throwing its rider. The other man turned his mount sharply, ducking behind cover. Ayoka pressed her back against the rock, clutching the edge with her good hand. They won't stop. I know. Elias chambered another round. They want that bounty too bad. The men fired again from the ridge, bullets cracking against the stones. Elias ducked and waited, counting the rhythm of their shots, the pauses between reloads. When the silence came, he moved fast, crawling to a higher rock ledge for a better view. The fallen rider was struggling to get up, the others shouting orders. Elias fired again, this time hitting the rock beside the standing man, sending fragments into his face. The man stumbled backward, yelling in pain. The horses spooked and bolted down the far slope, vanishing into the heat. When the echo faded, there was no more gunfire. Only wind. Ayoka looked at him, breathing hard. You hit them. He nodded once. Enough to keep them off us. But they'll regroup. We move now. They climbed out of the canyon fast, following a narrow path through scattered brush. The sun was dropping lower now, the light turning deep orange. Both of them were drenched in sweat, their clothes coated in dust. Ayoka's shoulder had started bleeding again under the strain, but she said nothing. She just kept pace. By the time the first shadow of the ranch appeared, a low structure of weathered boards and a stone chimney, the horizon was burning red. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was home. Elias stopped a few yards out, raising a hand. Stay back until I call you. He approached slowly, rifle lowered but ready. The door creaked open before he reached it. An old man stepped out, gray-bearded, sun-creased, wearing a tattered vest and holding a shotgun loosely in his hands. Well, I'll be damned, the man said, squinting. Elias Ward. Thought you were bones by now. Not yet, Elias said. Need shelter for a few days. Got someone with me. We're being followed. Calder's eyes narrowed. Army trouble? Worse. Bounty riders. The old man nodded once, then stepped aside. Get her inside. Elias turned and motioned for Ayoka. She hesitated, scanning the place, but his expression told her it was safe. Inside, the air was cool, smelling faintly of wood smoke and old coffee. Calder poured water from a jug into 2 tin cups and handed them over without question. Ayoka drank first, then asked quietly, You knew him long? Worked cattle for him before the war, Elias said. He helped me after the raid. I owe him. Calder grunted. You don't owe me a damn thing. But if someone's hunting you, you'd best tell me who and why before it rides to my door. Elias glanced at Ayoka. Her face was still unreadable. They're after her, he said finally. There's a bounty, false one. $50, dead or alive. The old man swore under his breath. And you brought that here. Elias's tone stayed level. Didn't have a choice. Calder looked between them, then sighed. Then we'll deal with it. I got 2 rifles, enough bullets to make him regret coming. Ayoka spoke softly. You shouldn't risk your life for me. The old man smiled, showing worn teeth. Miss, I stopped worrying about dying a long time ago. If they come, they'll find 3 of us ready. That night, the small ranch was quiet but tense. Elias repaired the windows, checked the horses in the stable, and posted watch near the fence line. Ayoka sat by the fire inside, cleaning her wound with hot water. When he came back in, she looked up at him. You could have left me, she said again, her voice almost a whisper. Back in the canyon. He met her eyes. You keep saying that like it's something I could do. Why? She asked, genuine confusion in her tone. Elias leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Because the last time I walked away from someone who needed help, it cost me everything. I'm not making that mistake again. She didn't answer, but something in her gaze changed. A flicker of trust, fragile but real. Outside, the night wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Elias listened to it, feeling the old weight of dread press against his chest. But this time, he wasn't alone. There was a woman beside the fire who had lost everything, an old friend guarding the gate, and a small ranch that might just stand one more night against the emptiness of the desert. Tomorrow would bring danger. He knew that. But as he looked at Ayoka, her face lit by the soft orange glow of the flames, he realized something he hadn't let himself feel in years. He actually wanted to see what tomorrow would bring. The morning came heavy and still. No birds, no wind. Only the thick quiet that meant the desert was holding its breath. Elias was the first to rise. He stepped out onto the porch with his rifle in hand, his eyes sweeping across the flatland beyond the fence line. The light was sharp, the sky colorless and dry. He knew that kind of silence. It always came before trouble. Inside, Calder was already up, setting coffee to boil. Ayoka sat at the table, her arm freshly bandaged. She looked better, pale still but stronger. Her eyes followed Elias as he came back in. "Anything?" she asked. "Not yet," he said, though the tension in his shoulders told her he was waiting for something he couldn't see. Calder poured 3 cups, his hands steady despite his age. "If those men are smart, they'll stay gone," he muttered. "But I've lived long enough to know smart doesn't pay in these parts." Elias nodded slightly. "They'll come. They've got reason now. That bounty wasn't a rumor." Ayoka looked down at her hands. "They'll never stop. As long as there's a price on my head, I'm hunted." Elias sat across from her. "Then we make sure there's nothing left to hunt." She frowned. "You can't kill every man chasing a bounty." "Don't need to," he said. "Just need to make an example out of the first ones who try." Calder gave a dry chuckle. "That sounds like the Elias I remember." They ate in silence after that, each lost in thought. Elias's mind kept circling the same problem: how to end this without running again. He'd spent years walking away from everything that tied him to life: his home, his friends, his faith. Now, sitting across from Ayoka, he felt something shift. He was done running. By midday, the wind picked up. Dust rolled across the plain in low, twisting spirals. From the ridge to the north came faint shapes, riders. 3, maybe 4. Elias raised his rifle to the window, squinting through the glare. "They found us," he said quietly. Ayoka stood, moving toward the door. "I'll go. If they see me here, they'll burn this place down trying to get me." Elias stepped in front of her. "No, you step outside. You're dead before they ask your name. I won't let you die because of me." He met her eyes, his voice low and steady. "We're past that. You're not running anymore." Calder grabbed his shotgun and moved to the front porch. "You two argue later. Let's get to work." They took positions, Calder at the window facing the north ridge, Elias near the corner post by the fence, Ayoka crouched by the door with a revolver she could barely lift but refused to put down. The riders drew closer, their shapes sharpening into men wrapped in dust coats, rifles slung across their saddles. The lead man called out, voice hoarse and mocking. "Ward, we just want the girl. Hand her over, and we'll leave your bones where they fall." Elias didn't reply. He watched their approach, counted the distance, 50 yards, 40, 30. He could see the greed in their eyes, even from here. When the first one raised his rifle, Elias fired. The shot hit square in the chest. The man fell backward, hitting the ground hard. The other 2 ducked behind their horses, returning fire. Bullets slammed into the wood posts, splintering them apart. Calder fired once from the porch, his shot catching a second rider in the leg. The man screamed and dropped. 2 down, Calder shouted, reloading fast. The last man tried to flank the house, firing wild. Elias moved fast, low and wide, circling through the side path toward the barn. He waited until the rider passed within range, then stepped out and fired point blank. The man fell from his horse, rolling in the dust. Silence followed, sharp and total. Only the wind moved. Elias lowered his rifle, breathing hard. Calder stepped off the porch, checking the bodies. "You sure know how to keep things interesting," he muttered. Elias wiped sweat from his brow. "That's all of them for now." Ayoka came out slowly, her face pale. She looked at the bodies, then at Elias. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," he said, "because they weren't coming for you. They were coming for what you represent." She frowned. "And what's that?" He took a moment before answering. "Someone worth saving." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "What happens now?" Elias looked toward the horizon. "Now we start over. There'll be others, maybe more bounty men, maybe worse. But they'll find this place guarded. We'll fix the roof, mend the fences, make it look alive again." Calder grinned. "Sounds like work I can finally use help for." Ayoka smiled faintly, the first true smile since the storm. "You mean stay here? With you?" Elias nodded. "You've got nowhere to run to, and I've got nowhere left to go. This is as good a place as any to stop." They spent the rest of the day burying the dead men near the ridge, marking the graves with nothing more than small stones. The work was quiet and solemn. Elias said nothing, but when he straightened from the last grave, The weight in his chest felt lighter than it had in years. That evening, as the sun dropped low and the air turned gold, Ayoka sat on the porch steps, watching the light fade over the hills. Elias joined her, lowering himself beside her with a tired sigh. "You stayed," she said quietly. He glanced at her. "You said that before, and you didn't answer." He smiled faintly. "Didn't need to." A long silence followed, the kind that felt earned, not awkward but peaceful. Calder hummed softly inside as he brewed coffee, the smell of it drifting through the open window. For the first time since the storm, Elias let himself relax. The land was still harsh, still unforgiving, but it no longer felt empty. He had built something small but real, a place, a reason, a promise. As the last light of day sank behind the ridge, Ayoka leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He didn't move away. In that moment, there were no more debts to pay, no ghosts to chase, no words left unsaid. Just the quiet certainty that, after years of loss and silence, Elias Ward had finally found something that felt like home. And in the heart of the Arizona desert, where nothing ever stayed alive for long, two broken souls had done the impossible. They had survived, not by running, but by choosing to stay.